Welcome to another episode of the CPGGUYS podcast. Our co-hosts, Shri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers online, in-store, and everywhere in between. And now, here are Shri and Peter. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Consumer Engagement in an Omnichannel World. I'm your co-host, Peter V.S. Bond. I'm also the Vice President of Retail Strategy at Power Reviews. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host. He is an entrepreneur in his own right. He is an e-commerce luminary. He's so famous that he really only goes by his first name. Please, everybody, join me in welcoming my partner, Shri Rajagopalan. Hey, Shri, how you doing today?
It's like the Yankees, just one name. Yankees, 9-2, Dodgers, 9-4, just for the record, Peter. And welcome, Gia. It's a pleasure to have you. We'll look forward to an amazing dialogue today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shri. So everyone, we're committed here to featuring all aspects of omnichannel, and particularly from an entrepreneurial perspective. We recently had on Jeff Smith, the former group chair of consumer products at J&J, and he's recently started up a business, but he obviously had a tremendous amount of experience coming from a very big company. What we thought we'd do is also feature someone who has started an omnichannel business from the ground up without any of that experience, and talk to her about all of the challenges and how she adapted her business model. So I am very pleased to welcome Gia Cyrier to our show. Gia, how are you today?
I'm well. Thank you guys so much for having me. It's such an honor.
Now, everyone, I met Gia several years ago when I was at CVS Health, and Gia was working for Kimberly-Clark, one of my suppliers. She had her first meeting with me and apparently decided after that she was going to be my friend. And there was nothing that was going to stop that. So she proceeded to pursue that. And then after I introduced my wife to her, it was game over. They cut the middleman out, and I've just been along for the journey ever since.
Us guys always get that end of the stick.
Isn't it a little
You're
crazy?
Not alone. You are not alone.
And that's not true.
Gia's had some of her career has been more traditional in terms of retail, CPG, and agency. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But more recently, she's started up an omni-channel e-commerce business and has been evolving it over the last couple of years. So with that, what I want to do is kind of dig into your background, Gia, because I think our audience is going to be very interested to understand how you came up with this, kind of what happened, and
Sure.
You know, the good, the bad, and the ugly of your omni-channel journey. That sound good?
Yeah, sounds awesome.
All right. So I mentioned you spent a more traditional kind of CPG career, having worked at big companies like CVS Health and Kimberly-Clark and the Mars agency. Those are all, anyone who's in the CPG space, very familiar with that. And then a number of years ago, you decided to take a different tack, and you drove almost the entire way across the country to start this new business. Why don't you give us a little background on what happened and why you decided to make this big change in your professional career?
Yeah, for sure. It's quite a journey, and it certainly isn't a linear one, that's for sure. And not necessarily what I planned, but I have 4 children, and at 36 weeks pregnant, I lost my job. And I had to pivot very quickly. And when I was thinking about you asking me this question, I sort of paused and I thought, isn't it interesting the way that I had to pivot back in 2016 is really the way businesses are pivoting right now with this pandemic. And it was very quick, and it wasn't with a well thought out strategy. I was walking into many CPG companies with at this point, 38-week pregnant belly, interviewing for jobs, and really thinking about what I want to do and what I'm good at and what's in my soul, because how often do we have the opportunity to reinvent ourselves, right? So, you know, I do believe things happen the way they should, and I'm about to have this baby, and I get a phone call from a friend saying, "You want to buy my mobile boutique business?" And I was like, well, what's a mobile boutique business? I didn't even know what it was. I mean, what is a mobile children's boutique business? So after a lot of sort of back and forth, I bought this business. It's called Mini Emporium, and it is a branded children's store that was it was actually, it was not close to here. She was out in Arkansas area. So we decided we were going to buy this truck, buy the brand, buy her audience.
So it wasn't brick and mortar. It was chrome and rubber. It literally was a truck.
Literally chrome and rubber. And, you know, buying her audience, what I didn't know at the time, all things we're going to talk about, is very different than, you know, my potential audience here, right? I'm still in the mind of a CVS marketer where, you know, the world is my oyster. Well, that's not true for a small business owner, particularly when you're talking children's clothes. So we buy all these things. We buy her audience, we buy chrome and rubber and some inventory that went along with it. We shipped the truck here. I popped out a baby, and here we start Mini Emporium. And at this point, I have 4 kids under 4. So most people think that's kind of crazy. I guess in hindsight, it really is kind of crazy, but it's what I did. I have 0 experience in retail from a buying perspective. So this was all, and I think we will get to that during this conversation, but this was all just trial and error. So,
so the model is it's a truck that is a mobile showroom that you would go to venues, and we'll let you kind of dig into that, where people could walk into your truck, see samples, and then ideally order the size relevant for their children, and then you would deliver it to them.
Well, close, Peter. It actually, this was one of really the problems with it, was scalability. So the mobile showroom had all of my SKUs. So there was only so many number of SKUs that one could carry in a mobile showroom. So I got the truck, I would call markets, I reached out to our Chamber of Commerce, and I would try and park the truck wherever I could. Amazingly enough, I am not the best driver. I don't have the best driving record. I've gotten pulled over many times, including on the way to birth my second child. And you don't need a special permit to drive my truck, which is crazy because someone like me should. So I basically can park the truck anywhere and sell out of it with my business license. Which is crazy. You know, people always ask me, well, what special permit do you need? I really don't. You know, you can sign up for fairs, but it's this mobile showroom, but more than a showroom, mobile store but I learned very quickly. I learned 2 weeks in, this is not a sustainable business. I can't go out and sell a few $100s worth of stuff and profit much less than that and make this a business. Oh, by the way, I did start another job. So I was working a full-time job and trying to get this business off the ground. So I really had to think about, how can I make this scalable and do what seemingly is working, which is buying clothes that people like and want to have, but move a little bit away from that scarcity model. So, you know, so I can just get more items, get more SKUs, get more dollars in the basket.
Wow.
Go ahead.
Meant to be.
Well, you know, I'm on the cusp of starting another store. I'm starting a women's store that is my pivot off of Mini Emporium tree. And I learned so much. And, you know, sometimes I'll say to my husband, I failed here, so I learned how to do it here. And none of it was a failure, like where I didn't fail anywhere. I just learned, right? Like, so when I said I had to scale, so I started calling retail shopping centers because I'm seeing all these empty, my husband owns a commercial real estate business. And, you know, he'd always sort of be talking about, there's all this empty real estate around. Maybe you can do a pop-up. Maybe you can pay a percentage of sales and not pay a monthly rent. Maybe you can put your store in there. And wow, then you have the truck and the store. And we'll talk about e-commerce in a second. And that's actually a true omni-channel approach to this business, right? You're no longer just this truck with, you know, maybe a few items online. So I spent about a year and a half doing pop-ups, which is a really interesting model because it worked. It sort of works for everyone, you know. By
now, when you're doing these pop-ups and you're very mobile doing these pop-ups, how old are the kids?
How old? It was 6 months later. I figured out very quickly that standing on the street and selling children's clothes was not gonna. despite that it became a side gig and not my full-time gig, it wasn't working.
So here you are, you have mobile already, you're doing these pop-ups, you're thinking about commercial real estate, basically shops, getting into the store, that kind of thing. And how old are all the kids at this stage?
Yeah, so they're 6 months, 6 months, almost 2, almost 4 and 5.
So half a year, 2, 4, and 5. Like, I'm just listening to you speak. You said, you know, I've done a lot of trial and error. I've learned things. I've hustled. I lost my job and started interviewing when I was 36, 38 weeks pregnant. And then I decided, like, when I just put all these things in a basket, what it kind of reflects at me in the face is made to be entrepreneur. Because isn't this, like, in your opinion, isn't this like the story of an entrepreneur? Like, experiences, hustle, ready to do the next thing. Failure is just a way of life, but you learn from it. And then you realize you don't want to make the same failure. And then you just keep growing and growing and growing. Isn't that like Entrepreneur 101, that you're just now inspiring everyone listening to this to kind of learn?
That. I love that perspective. I think it is. I think we can all do it if we're all willing to fail over and over and over. And
all in the middle of 0.5 years old, 2 years old, 4 years old, and you said 5, right?
Yeah, she turned 5 in between that. Yep.
Ma'am, in episode 19, for the first time, I put a salute.
Really?
Uh-huh.
I'm flattered. No, you're very kind. You're very, very kind.
So Gia, so you started with the mobile, then you did the pop-up, and somewhere in there you decided, well, I've also got to have a digital experience. Can you walk us through all of the components of bringing that to life, selecting platforms, copy, images, all that is like, how did you go about deciding what we're going to do? And I'm assuming you did it somewhere between when you put your children to bed and when you woke up in the morning is when you did all of this.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's so funny because, like,
it's a few hours when the sun sets every day.
Just selecting an image, like your front page image for your web. I mean, that's like a 6-hour activity, right? It's like the biggest thing you'll ever do for your website. But I think
hold right there, Gia, because that word is something I would love for large brands to embody, right? You obsess 6 hours over one image, which is like your front page image. Guys, what's the industry doing? Are people obsessing over the first image on their Amazon ASIN or the Walmart ASIN? Like, spend the time to do it, right? Thank you for saying that.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I think one of the hardest things for me, Sri and Peter, is that I had worked for big brands my whole career. I started with Tracy Locke working on the Pepsi account. I mean,
we share that. When that was like early 2000s?
Yeah, that's how I know you. This is so funny. I'm like, I know this guy. Okay. And I mean, my first experience as a professional coming out of college was, I'll never forget this. I went to Vegas for this big meeting that we had every year. And I walked into this hotel room. I'd never seen anything like it before. And I worked on this account that you know, we had gigantic budgets, but I didn't know any different. I was 23 years old. I did just do a year of volunteer work, so I had somewhat of a little bit of a perspective. But I worked on this brand where I could spend whatever I wanted to on media. And at the time, ironically enough, it was radio and TV, right? That's what we spent a ton of money on. But you never feel it as much until you start your business, where, like, what does it really mean to have a budget when it's your own money? And when that money can make or break your business, right?
So think about CVS. I would spend like hours and days planning my email strategy. I did that with Peter, right? We'd think about the strategy. We had these top creatives make our beautiful imagery. We had professional writers write it, and then we deployed it so perfectly to the most beautifully curated audience of buyers, prospective buyers, past buyers. It's a gorgeous piece of work. But you don't have that. Here I am starting this website saying, well, do I buy email lists? Well, of course I don't. I learned that. But what does a real qualified buyer look like? right? And how do I communicate to them? And how do I talk to them personally without them feeling like, well, they're just another buyer in the children's market?
But earlier you referred to audience, right? Like when we started this conversation, you said you literally bought chrome and rubber for the audience, and that was the number one reason. You come from Tracy Locke, which
Yep.
as a brand builder, as a entrepreneur, one of the greatest gifts one can have is knowing and understanding audience and media. Like, how did audience, media, what you bought when you first got chrome and rubber, how is that reflected now in what you do every day today as an entrepreneur growing your business?
It's a funny question. You know, I had a funny week last week because I did some consulting work, some marketing consulting, and people look at me one way when I do that. And then someone who literally lives down the street from me, we live in a beautiful neighborhood in Andover, but around the corner is some very beautiful homes. And someone who lives down the street from me who has never met me reached out to me. I was at an event with the truck, and they reached out and they said, do you ever come to Andover? Well, that's the town I live in. And I said, yes. She said, well, can you come and bring, the truck to the street? And I said, of course. So my husband came with me to drop the truck off. Again, we're around the corner. And, we were just treated like, we own this this boutique and we ran this truck. And I have to tell you, I had a moment of pause where I'm the owner of this chrome and rubber on this side of my life. And then I'm a professional on this side of my life. But I can never forget like who I am, the person who owns this chrome and rubber, right? That's standing there with these like $2 million homes, not my home for sure, selling clothes off of chrome and rubber. And I don't think that totally answered your question, but you sort of reminded me of that moment of transition,
Sometimes that's what life, it's meant to be.
So Gia, let's get back to the
Sure.
digital storefront.
Sure.
So you want to sell. So you need an e-commerce platform.
Yep.
Yeah. Building your own is probably unrealistic from a you're not a code writer. You don't write code. So you probably went out and looked at platforms that you could buy. What did you look at and how did you decide? And once you did that, what did you do to get yourself off the ground?
Yeah, sure. I feel like this is where I feel a little insecure because I feel like you're going to talk to people who give you their amazing process of coming to these tools. But I went to all little small boutiques and looked at their extension, like looked at where they were hosting their websites and what platforms they were using. I probably looked at 10 to 15 and did a little bit of research and found that Shopify was going to be the most user-friendly platform through GoDaddy to host my site. And I'm fortunate enough to be married to an entrepreneur who has spent 20 years doing these things and trying these things and finding little ways around things and saying to me, I don't know the answer to that, but you can look on YouTube and watch a video on it. Or, we don't have a graphic designer, but Canva's pretty awesome. Why don't you learn how to use Canva? And I feel like that is the secret sauce to all of this. I'm not running a huge company, but finding the tools that I can do awesomely that make me look, a little bit more of an expert at the visual than I am. And Canva integrated with Shopify is an amazing platform. It integrates with QuickBooks. It has easy inventory access. There's some little tweaks with, on the mobile in terms of sizing, but it's been a great platform and very affordable. That's the other thing. The fees are nominal for a one-man show, right?
Shri, we talk a lot about Amazon and Vendor Central versus Seller Central, and all the solutions that come along with FBA versus FBM. And what I hear is, here's another platform. The reason it probably succeeds is because it has these integrations and it comes with these capabilities that don't force you to sit there and have to operate in 2 different siloed or 3 different siloed environments. Everything can be integrated, and that makes it easier for someone who's starting an e-commerce business to get it off the ground and make it.
Peter, to me, it sounds like you just birthed the next omnichannel hot minute Shopify. 3 reasons why, 3 opportunities. and the verdict. Mr. Peter
Yeah.
will deliver the verdict. But listening to your talk, Gia, I'm going back to March 13th. That was the day I decided to move on and get into the entrepreneurial world.
Wait,
I was used
March
to
13th?
yes, March
It's the
13th.
day, basically the day our world closed, right?
Yes, believe it or not, yes.
Okay.
Within 4 days after that, New York
my
went
gosh.
from we don't know anything about COVID to oh my gosh, we need to shut everything down. That's literally what happened. Of
Oh my
course,
gosh.
back then in March, no one could have forecast COVID, and I can't really go back and tell you if that would have played into my decision. But I just heard you talk and how you your process for down selecting tools was let's get on the internet, let's research a bunch, and let's make a selection in 48, 72 hours. Now, from the world I come from, which is like Johnson and Johnson and Revlon
Yeah.
and Pepsi, we would go to procurement, who would make us write a month-long RFP.
Absolutely.
They would vet the RFP, and it would take 3 months, and then we'd work. SAP Hybris is the best thing to do because it's the ERP that works the best. Like, why do I even care?
Yeah.
And now on March 21st, I was given the task of what is your email program and what is your loyalty marketing program. So Hootsuite, Canva,
Sure.
Klaviyo, Shopify. This is my life now. And
Sure.
if I circle back, I nowadays ask myself a question, which I want to make sure we can even inspire those at big brands. These processes don't have to be 3 months. They don't have to be 6 months. And those who own these tools, get involved, have an opinion. Don't just make it a long procurement process for risk avoidance. Do
Sure.
what's right for the consumer. But the question, I wanted to make sure we get that message out as you communicated it so articulately. But a question I wanted to ask you is, if we look through your career profile, you come from CVS Health and Pepsi and Tracy Locke as an account. You're not exactly an apparel person. So how did you go about that process of procuring apparel and then know what was the right pricing model for it, both to
Sure.
acquire it and then to pass it on to the consumer with value?
Yeah, it's such a great question because this is where if I had a more traditional background in apparel and inventory particularly, I think that it wouldn't have been so hard because that's where I really, really struggled with Mini Emporium, and I'm applying those learnings as I launch my women's line. But I like fashion and I like to curate clothes, and I do that in a unique way. I find a piece here, I find a piece there. Sometimes I pay TJ Maxx pricing, sometimes I pay Nordstrom pricing. So as I started the process of procuring clothes and going to shows and buying, I applied a little bit of that like retail methodology, which isn't a methodology. It's a consumer. It's not a buyer, right? So I would go, it's embarrassing to say this, but I would go and find what I liked and get it for my store. And everyone loved it. Of course they did. It was beautiful stuff. But I cringe when I think of, I wasn't buying things in the model of what I learned working at CVS and what I know well, and thinking like, okay, I have to get 2.73 on this shirt or I can't buy it. Or this is just not, like, understanding my market better. Like, Andover is somewhat of an affluent community, but what are the communities around me that are going to help make this a business, and how far can I stretch them? Again, things I knew with my job at Kimberly-Clark and had such a hard time applying as a small business owner. And it wasn't until the pandemic until I figured this out, which is crazy to say, but I'll share with you that, so the pandemic hit, mid-March, and a big part of my life is I have this wonderful running buddy, and it's free therapy every morning. She's a nurse at MGH, and we run every morning at 4:30. And I couldn't run with her anymore. So now I was getting up, and I was inspired by myself to run during the pandemic. And I will share, if I ever start a blog, which I won't, it's going to be called 143 Seconds, because in September 8th of 19, I missed qualifying for the Boston Marathon by 143 seconds.
Oh.
But that 143 seconds got me up every day. During the pandemic, when I didn't have to be up, what did I have to be up for? So I got up every day, I did my runs, and I thought, and that's something I'm an extreme extrovert, just sitting with my thoughts is not something I do very well. And I had all this inventory. I had paused on Mini Emporium because life had gotten very busy. I was coaching my kids' teams, and which is very important to me to be able to do that. I was, helping with
So
some.
not only are you running multiple businesses, you're sourcing, you're also coaching kids' teams.
Yeah, I am. I'm not great at playing on the rug with my kids, but I love coaching their teams. I love the aspect of that.
Double salute.
Well, but I'm not sitting on the rug playing with them. So, I'm going through this process during the pandemic of running alone. And I feel like almost everything I ever learned, came to the forefront. Understanding, I can't buy these, even though they're beautiful clothes, I can't price them. People are not going to spend the top of the market, particularly for children's clothes. And that was a big lesson for me. And how I present things in a way that people buy. And so I started doing these bundles, and it seems, I think one of the things I thought about as I talked to Peter and had these pre-conversations was so much of what I did and do that I feel like are making me successful are so simple. So I stopped giving people choices, and I started doing these bundles, and I would do one price point. Here's a bundle for $82. It includes 6 items. You can't change that item. And in 1 week, I sold through every piece of inventory I ever had. 1 week. And that would be relative to 8 months of sales during a pandemic. I don't know who's buying children's clothes during a pandemic, but somehow this group of people is. But it took 5 years, almost 5 years of learning truly every part of omnichannel to be able to present that to my consumer and have it work. And that was a huge takeaway for me.
And as you're doing this before the pandemic, but even during the pandemic, how are you getting the word out? What are the channels that you're using to maximize consumer engagement?
Sure. So I took an Instagram class, a silly little Instagram 101 that you would think someone starting a boutique would have done at the start. But you guys would agree the way we use social media personally and professionally is very different. So I took that class, which I actually just retook last week. I'm going to retake again next week because there's so much to learn about hashtags and timing and when you post in this category and imagery and just so much and how to get followers.
Yeah, if you know how many hours a day I get messages from Shree, just sweating over the right hashtag and the right placement. This is his life. He eats this up. So you're telling him now, you see him smiling, it's because he so respects you for this.
Oh God, Shree, I feel like that's kind.
And if there's a recommendation you want to make for our audience on where to take this one-on-one class, because most people, what they use Instagram for, and that's how they know it, is I post a photo and I say a couple things.
Yeah.
And Instagram is today's one of the most amazing selling and interaction vehicles that exists, and a media publisher.
It's David someone. So here's the other thing. This is a little unfair advantage I have. My husband subscribes to all these things as an entrepreneur, and then I get to use them. So that's my operating costs are less because of that. I can't remember what he subscribes to, but it's just.
You have no idea. Again, we scrape and we borrow and we do whatever we can to find what we need.
Yeah.
To deliver against that. We don't have the big resources of a big company helping us. So
but it
you're
makes it
right where we are.
But it feels. You don't need to. Really, it's analogous to what we're going through with life right now, right? We're 2 entrepreneurs in this pandemic, and so we're saying we went to North Conway yesterday just for the day, and we said to our kids, we're going to take a nature walk. There's these really cool there's these cool waterfalls. We're not going to go spend the $500 on the train or on the amusement park. We're gonna drive 2 hours. We're gonna take a nature walk, and then we're gonna go on this little roller coaster, and that's what we're gonna do. And I have to tell you, it's simpler and better. And I feel like that is the 2 in 1 and the same. As an entrepreneur, you figure it out, and it's simple. And I feel like if I apply that to raising my children, everyone is happier.
So one of the areas that I think we'd love to chat some more about is this inspiration, right? You referred to a running buddy as a source of inspiration. Where else? So clearly, running buddy has worked amazing for you. You kind of probably share ideas. What we'd love to learn is, what are the other sources you go for inspiration? Do you have somebody like you can go to as a coach, or do you believe in that ecosystem where you can lean on someone to ask for assistance and help and guidance? Like, what are the various ways you continue to learn today? You already gave us the example of Instagram 101, which I actually don't know a lot of founders willing to roll up their sleeves and take a 101 class and truly get into the DNA of how hashtags is done. That is really cool, by the way, as Peter said earlier. But where do you go for inspiration, and how do you get your advice?
Yeah, well, I think that the one thing that, working at big companies for so long, I built a lot of relationships, and I love people. I don't know, is that cheesy to say, but it's how I learn. I don't ferociously sit way down at night and read, but I love learning about people, and my relationships over the years have helped build my businesses. I mean, Peter being a huge one of them. Barry Harlem, who just left, oh wait, no, she's still with them, but she's at Lord & Taylor. Melissa Studinsky, who was an executive at CVS. All of the I think of like the VPs of J&J, Janice Cooney, all of the folks that I worked with at Kimberly-Clark from a
My gosh, Janice Cooney and I are like very close friends.
I love it. She's just...
Our journeys patched each other for 5 years.
It's amazing. She's, or Chatham, Michelle Healy, she is a beautiful, special soul. I mean, I think there's so much to be said about what I got out of sitting in the lobby of CVS for all those years. I mean, that in and of itself is like millions of dollars, because it's these truly lifelong friendships for me. Like, they're more than just a once a year Christmas card that I have no problem sending a text or a phone call saying, what do you think of this? Or what do you think of this? Or is this a dumb idea? And I mean, I just named a couple, but I feel like at least once a week I'm reaching out to someone. And maybe, there's a lot of people still even at CVS who I grew up with, who are in much different positions than when we were 22, there's so much to be learned from people. We're all so quick to go to, www. whatever. And, we're surrounded by knowledge.
Hey, have you learned from some of your customers, and what have been the primary methods that it's guided the business decision?
Sure. You know what I will say? It's, I'm sure you guys will agree, customer service can be really hard and really painful and really hard not to take personal. I'm an Italian Jew. I take everything personally. And I've learned to not listen to the customer of one. I did that for a while. I'll get you this one item, but one item is usually 6 or 8. And then the basket that I couldn't fill with that one item became a -6 or a -5. But I also have learned to listen to my customers, and that's hard, right? Because you don't want to listen to the customer of one, but customers are telling you what they want and what they want to see and what they're thinking about and what they're feeling and what emotionally makes them tick. Like, oh, if I just put a little magnet board in the back of the truck to keep their kids busy, they're going to be able to have a more peaceful shopping experience. And my employees, I mean, that's hard, right? It's hard to be an entrepreneur and manage all the needs of employees in the way that you want to, and which was with care and thought. And I found that to be very, very challenging.
Yeah, you got a little bit there into like the future of retail, right? Retail is no longer just walk in and shop. And you gave the example of the whiteboard that you put on the truck so kids can stay engaged.
Sure.
Maybe that's the future of malls. When you shop, maybe the experience is for everybody in the family. And that leads to my next question, which is I'd love to get into consumer acquisition. Like, what vehicles are you using for consumer acquisition? Because in a startup, that's one of the largest investments you're going to make on a per consumer basis, and managing that number and optimizing it. So is it just digital media for you? Now, obviously you've got the ability, you're somewhat brick and mortar because you're feet on the street every day with the truck.
Sure.
You're at pop-ups. Like, what are the different vehicles for consumer acquisition?
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting because that's definitely evolved over time. Like, as we start 2020, consumer acquisition is 100% Instagram followers.
So it's getting on Boston Businesswomen, and
So I assume you've hit the 10,000 mark and you can do swipe ups now?
we've hit 198 people. We
Okay.
did
Organic.
our
Organic.
coming soon. We did our coming soon like 3 days ago.
That's
So.
twice as many as we have, Shri.
Organic.
And I'll say my business partner, she's pretty much gotten 196 of them through some networking. But again, like consumer acquisition has changed so much over time, right? Like I bought this business, so I sent an email to everyone because that's how I did it at CVS. And isn't everyone going to love what I'm selling, right? Well, 70% of that audience didn't really care, or more. That's actually probably, it's more. But I found, in terms of mini emporium consumer acquisition, a lot of word of mouth. And that's why coming into the pandemic and being so successful is because it was 4 to 5 years of standing on the street, right? And building those relationships with people. And you can't do that when you're, that's a very hard business proposition. And I want to give you a better answer than me standing on the street selling clothes to people, because I think it's more than that. But I tried digital tools. I tried paid ads. I tried, the pop-ups did well because it brought in, again, the pop-ups were brilliant, and that I got more people to my email, to my list. And then in times like the pandemic, I communicated to all those people, right? So 4 pop-ups later, literally my 80-year-old father on the floor of a pop-up, like painting it to make sure it looks nice. I had a good size audience, but I think that is a huge challenge for a small business when you don't have the resources to go spend, when you're starting up, right? It's very hard.
But what I hear, if I filter through everything you just said, what I hear you say very clearly is Instagram is the benchmark for success for audience in 2020.
For my business 2020, absolutely. That it's 100% the benchmark. But it's an online business, right?
Yep.
But I will say this is really interesting. I had a business owner in our town say to me, so she has a brick and mortar store too, one in our town, one in Winchester, a town not too far away. And she said she was able to pay for her son's first year of college in cash with the money she made in the pandemic by doing Instagram stories. And I was like, wow, talk about someone pivoting. Meanwhile, the people next to her have shut their doors, right?
Wow.
Yeah. Talk about a hustler.
So there's someone who adapted in the pandemic. This has been really interesting. I want to ask you another kind of a final question, but Shri may have some more.
I do.
But I personally want to know, now you're pivoting. So now you've done this, you learned a lot. Why did you decide to pivot into adult clothing, and what are you learning? What'd you learn, and how do you think you're going to be more successful at this?
Yeah. Well, I think children's clothes are challenging because your audience is constantly changing, right? Kids are growing. So your audience, you pretty much have your audience.
You have to acquire new customers as their children age down.
You have to acquire new customers because children's clothes are basically like 0 to, it's 0 to 8, and then you're in a whole new category. So you have to think about it like that.
Repeat purchase windows also are very narrow.
Yeah.
Very narrow. And look at your competition. And this is true for adults, but look at your competition for kids. You can go into Target, get laundry detergent, do everything you need for your house, and pick up pretty awesome clothes for your kids, right?
Yeah.
They've sort of mastered that. I found myself always leaning towards the adult space. Peter probably knows this. I would think more about what I was wearing into a meeting than probably the meeting itself. I say that like a little.
I was always underdressed for any meeting that Gia was in. I looked like I could be wearing a tie and I would have been a total schlub. She is a fashion plate.
There's a creative side of curating clothes that just fills my soul. Part of me feels silly saying that, especially when my running partner is literally like with cancer patients every day. But it's also, it's part of who I am. And to be honest with you, it wasn't, you know, where I was a year ago. A year ago, I probably would tell you I was starting an adult store. And it really was my business partner that came up, that approached me, and this idea of an online boutique without, you know, it's going to be a scarcity model. It's going to be essentials, and it's, our inventory proposition is going to be very different than what I was dealing with Mini Emporium. I have a partner in crime, which I think is, you're always accountable to someone when you have a business partner, right? Mm-hmm. That's a pretty awesome thing.
What I hear you seeing, Gia, is whereas you did children's clothing because you thought it could be interesting, now you're pursuing something that is your passion. And that I hear Shri very loud, that if
yeah, it is,
really should pursue something that you are truly passionate about.
I am, and children's clothing is very fun because, I mean, look, dressing our kids up in cute clothes is, it's pretty awesome, right? I mean, it's lighthearted, it's awesome. A smiling kid, I mean, what's better? But I am, and you know, it's a nice spot to be, to say I'm actually selling Mini Emporium, and I'm pivoting, and I feel awesome about it, and I'm taking those learnings, and oh my gosh, I can apply them.
So I do have one last question for
yes,
this episode,
yes.
which is, as I'm just listening to you speak, I'm thinking aloud. You're a mother to 4 children, as we've discussed. You're constantly on the hustle. You're trying to build this business. It's a lot of acquisition of product, and then constantly formulating audience. You got Instagram, you got to curate, you got to be out on the street, meeting people all the time. You don't have, you know, as a result of what you do, you don't have the luxury of long repeat purchase cycles. What does a day in the life of Gia look like?
My husband would laugh at this question. Oh gosh, I feel I do get up. We talked about this. I get up very early. Today, Sarah and I were running at about 4:30. Came home. My house is not always neat. I will say, like, what do we let go in our lives, right? We all have to let different things go at different times. I come home, I always fold their laundry so they have clothes to wear. So every single day, I mean, you know, we're a family of 6. The laundry is always going. So generally at about 6 a.m., I'm putting all the laundry away. They're up at about 7, and I really, really, really like them at that hour because I have my endorphin high. I've been a little productive. They're kind of fresh and cute out of bed. And I really enjoy that time. Yesterday morning, my second and I went and played tennis. That's the other thing, right? I mean, being an entrepreneur is really hard, but the gift of flexibility is, my kids don't realize it right now, but the fact that I could play tennis at 8 a.m. with my son on a Tuesday, that's pretty amazing. My father, who lives with us, we have an in-law apartment and he lives with us. He was 9 to 5. He made he just couldn't, he worked, you know, he couldn't be there. We obviously a very different world. He just retired, but I wasn't raised in a digital world like this. We've been very fortunate enough, and I feel a little scared saying this because I know some people would disagree, but we have done some camps this summer. So at some level we have, you know, some sort of camp every day. So my dad lives with us. My mother's 10 miles. My in-laws are 1 mile. So we have an army of love and help and a whole army of babysitters. But frankly, paying a babysitter when you're starting a business is really hard too, right? Like I truly think about, like, it's funny to say that, but I do. I think about if I'm gonna go, this makes me hustle more. If I'm spending like $200 to go work today, I have to seriously hustle because that's right. I mean, that's real money when you think about it in this mindset, right? Because I'm starting a business, so I didn't make 200 today, right? But the other thing is, right now we're just starting, so I'm home by 4 and we go swimming, we do something. I really try and give that to my kids. I've been really bad this last 2 weeks about being on my phone, like terribly bad. If I saw myself like in another mom, I'd think that she was just disgusting. Like I've been staring at my phone and they've been talking to me. Cause I did this cute anyways, so you know, the other thing about the pandemic that's been amazing, Shree and Peter, is we've had dinner together every night for 6 months. It's been like the best thing in the world. I mean,
Yeah.
the day the world stopped, that weekend, my oldest, I'll give you one kid, she had a hockey tournament, she had another hockey game, she had a play that she'd been practicing since November, and she had a soccer tournament. And that all stopped. And it's been, some of it's, I don't take away the sadness of the world, but some of that's been a blessing. We actually spend time together at night. And then, you know, of course, then usually at like 7, I turn into a pumpkin and I do work at night, and my husband puts the kids to bed because, you know, I go to bed early. And I don't know, it's pretty simple. I mean, there's always work, like part of that, you know, every step of the way. I mean, you guys know, you don't ever stop anything.
Yeah, I
right?
can't imagine you ever sitting on a couch, just flipping the TV channel around, doing nothing.
I
You
don't,
are
I can't,
always moving.
I
You are
can't.
always moving.
My husband said, you know, I wish I was better. I wish I was better at that. But for me, my husband says there's 2 speeds. And God bless him. He is a saint. He says it's full or dead. So that's what it is.
Well, this
So the
has been
one thing,
Go ahead.
so the one thing is, my kids are 15 and 20.
Yeah.
There does come a moment in life when now the tables have turned. When they talk to me, their phones are in their hand, and getting their attention gets increasingly harder, because they're obviously in now an ecosystem of a much larger social circle, which us as parents, my wife and I adapt every single day. But you are so right when you say 6 months. One of the beautiful things that emerges, everybody shows up together for dinner, and we haven't missed a beat on that one.
Oh, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's such a gift. I know, like, whatever, they will look back at this and remember that we had dinner together every night. And we never did, you
For
know?
me, being able to watch my daughter learn how to walk and learn how to talk has been priceless.
Amazing. It's priceless.
I hear you. This has been a really interesting conversation.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah.
Shree, Peter reached out to me and I said, I'm a little nervous, Peter. You have some big names. So I appreciate you guys talking to me. It's very kind.
This was a blast.
Well,
You guys are wonderful.
Before I close this out, I want to remind all of our viewers and listeners, if you want to find all of our content, be it our LinkedIn page, our LinkedIn profiles, our Instagram page, anything, just go to linktree/CPGGuys. That's linktr.ee/CPGGuys. And what we'd really appreciate is if you would go and rate and do our podcast on Apple Podcasts. So go to tinyurl.com/Apple CPG podcast. If you do that, we'd really appreciate it. Gia, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you join us. You're my friend. You're the mother to my godson, Giancarlo. And I'm so glad that we were able to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shree, as always, I appreciate you being my co-host on this journey. And to everyone in the audience, thank you for listening to us, viewing us on YouTube, whatever it is. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to talking to you on the next episode of Consumer Engagement in an Omnichannel World. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.